So I've been doing these immediate reactions with a couple of games now, and Elden Ring just came out. I was pretty excited to do one for this, but when you know it, technology decided to be the real Dark Souls game today. And after recording about an hour and a half of my immediate thoughts as I was starting to play the game, for some reason decided not to record any of the gameplay footage. So I've just wrapped up the first hour and a half of Elden Ring, and I figured we would take a look and I'd talk a bit about some of my thoughts here so far in the game as someone who's maybe not as invested or into the Souls series as much as I'm sure many hardcore fans are. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if you're new to the Spawnway channel, make sure you subscribe down below. Okay, so the idea was I was going to do an initial 90 minutes to give you my immediate thoughts on the game. Unfortunately, this AverMedia capture device that I had decided not to record any of the gameplay, but I decided, you know what, I'll still talk about my initial thoughts in this game. I'll just get some gameplay footage and put it up as I go over what I think about kind of the opening segment of it. And then I played another 3.5 hours of the games. Now I'm just over 5 hours in. But I still wanted to give my thoughts on Elden Ring because I think this is a very impressive game from Software, and I do believe it changes up the Souls series basically forever. Now, when you first step out into the world of Elden Ring, it doesn't really tell you to do much. You have a map, there's no destination icons or anything, and it just sort of encourages you to explore. And that's the biggest difference here so far to me, is there is always this constant pull of what's over there. And the interesting thing about this is a lot of the open world games that I'll play, like a Far Cry or an Assassin's Creed, they'll just put icons all over the map. I was recently playing, of course, Horizon Forbidden West. There's icons everywhere. But with Elden Ring, they really work to just have this blank slate and attempt to keep it as blank as possible. And that sounds a bit weird because it's well, how are you going to remember where everything is? Well, I mean, you'll find different spots that are resting areas that you can teleport to. But for the most part, it does rely on you to uncover parts of the map as you're exploring and just find your way around, which does lead to some very fun and interesting discoveries by accident. Now, the game itself is a Souls game, which means you're going to die a lot. But I will say this is probably the most approachable game in the Souls series so far, mostly because of a lot of small conveniences that have been added so far that I've noticed. And it does kind of play into it being an open world style game that's very open-ended. And it essentially becomes a more forgiving Souls game. For example, you have checkpoints that are away from those typical resting spots. There was one boss that I died at. It's one of the first mandatory bosses. And instead of having to go all the way back necessarily down this hill and everything, because I missed one of the resting spots, it decided that there was a checkpoint by that boss that I didn't have a resting spot for, but I was able to still jump right back to it. And I guess they're doing this just because of that open world style where you may miss some of these spots because it's not as, I guess, linear as you would have with something like Demon Souls, for example. There's also the ability to fast travel to any of those resting spots all over the world as you discover them, basically whenever you want on the open, the open world map. Not necessarily when you're in one of these smaller dungeon areas, which is a pretty cool thing because you'll go around the overworld, you'll find a cave, and it turns into basically a small level from a Demon Souls or Dark Souls or something there. Now, you do also get a horse very early on, and that way you can traverse this open world much faster. You can summon this horse whenever you want, and yes, the horse can get basically killed, but you can bring them back. It is not really difficult to do any of that. So it definitely wants you to mostly just cruise around on this horse. You can even do double jumps. There's wind shooting out of the floor, and you can jump and just go flying up in the air with it. And I also noticed that when I was just kind of running around off of my horse, which I would do very frequently when I was kind of trying to maybe make my way around certain mountain areas and stuff, the stamina doesn't appear to deplete when I'm just kind of running around. The combat is very reflective of a Souls game. It's kind of that slow and purposeful action taking. Essentially, you can find your way into a lot of trouble by being over aggressive. especially early on when you're lower level. Now, when you start to build up your levels and you decide maybe a build that you want to do, like you want to be a tanky build where you're going to have a sword and shield, for example, and you build up your vitality and your defense, and you'll be able to take more hits. But I do know a lot of people will go magic, essentially, because that's supposed to be the easier route. And that's the best part here, is you can build your character with all these RPG elements any way you want. And people will, of course, figure out ways to break the game and do all kinds of stuff here. But that's generally the most exciting part about these Souls games, is figuring out different ways to play essentially the same game over and over again. And this is an open world style game, so certainly people will draw out like the correct paths to take if you want to speed run it or just get some of the best armor and weapons early on. Now, there was one really funny part in that like 90 minutes that I recorded, and that is that you can crouch in the game. And it doesn't sound like it's a big deal, but it is a big deal in these Souls games. You can also jump pretty freely when you're moving around, which is kind of needed since you're going to be doing some platforming here in kind of the overworld. But this has also led to sort of stealth, I guess. Like, you can crouch and sneak around and get up behind enemies because it's so open-ended, and just sort of take them out that way. It was just really funny because early on I was like, oh, you can crouch. This is incredible. And I'm like, wait, it's just crouching, but it's in a Souls game, so it's a big deal. Now, part of that, like getting stronger in the game, does mean that you are going to probably do a lot of it through trial and error, which will become frustrating. I do think people are going to rage quit and just give up on this game because of that fact. But I want to at least say, if you do run into a boss earlier on, even if it's like a sub-boss that's just giving you a hard time, just go the other way. Again, it's an open world style game where it really hinges on you just being curious and exploring in the world. And I'd find myself doing that. If I came across a boss that was just, it was tough, it was like, this might be a little too much for me now, there was always something else to do. So that's what I would encourage you to do, is just see what's over the next mountaintop or something off in the distance, and you might end up coming across a bunch of cool stuff along the way. I mean, really, this game does everything possible to just make you want to explore by giving you fast teleport travel spots and making it pretty easy to get around. So for that, I really like that they decided not to make it inconvenient to explore. Clearly, that's what they want you to do here. Graphically, I haven't been like overly impressed with this. It's okay at times. Like, there are times where you'll have these really large open areas and there are like these sweeping shots where you're looking around and you say, wow, this looks really good. There are certain bosses that are very unique looking. I mean, they obviously took a lot of time on sort of the unique characteristics, I'll say, of these boss characters, but then you'll see common enemies that look pretty basic. There'll be some environments that look bland to downright bad. So it's sort of a mix, and it just doesn't really do a lot outside of the Dark Souls games. I guess in the sense of this being an open world Souls game, it looks good, but there are just games out there that look better from other developers and studios. Oh, and while we're on the topic of the technical side of things, From Software unfortunately just seems to have an issue here. Out of all of it, this appears to be their weak spot. I seem to look back on brand new releases from them, and there are always these issues when it comes to frame rate and just the game itself working correctly out of the gate. And that seems to be a problem still. I'm seeing reports on PC that this game really struggles, will just outright pause and just stutter. And even on the consoles with the newer ones, the Xbox Series and the PS5, still frame rate issues. I do notice them when I'm playing this game just in the first 5 hours or so, especially when I'm panning the camera around while fighting in the open world. Yeah, it does have noticeable slowdown, and that's a frustrating thing for a game that is very reliant on reaction time from you to dodge or counter or do all these different things. Load times are way longer than I would expect with these newer systems specifically. I know there's still quite a bit of load time with the older platforms, the PS4 and the Xbox One, but I am getting to the point where I don't really expect long load screens for the PS5 and the Xbox Series, to where I kind of define that as anything more than 5 or 10 seconds, and those are actually present in Elden Ring. Really, when you go to a far off spot on the map, like you get teleported there, say, when opening a treasure chest, it does load for way longer than you would expect. Now, From Software has at least acknowledged these issues and said they're going to work on them as they go forward, but it's certainly something that is an unfortunate mark on the release of an otherwise interesting game. Now, I have not tried out the multiplayer yet. I do have some people I'm going to play with later on, kind of try out some of the co-op stuff because it was shown off in different previews. I believe you can have up to 4 people sort of playing this game together online. So I'll be curious to see how that turns out. As I get higher in level and further in the game, I'll take a shot and we'll see what happens there. But I have to say, this is a game that just gives me that feeling of discovery. And even though I've spent about 5 hours, I did this all almost in one shot. And I still want to go back and play more. And that is the sign to me of a good game. One that is able to hook you in the first couple of hours and just keep you going. Make it so that time just sort of melts away as you're playing and you realize, oh, the sun's coming up. I've been playing this game all night. And that's kind of the feeling I'm getting here with Elden Ring. Will it last? That's the big question for me now because, of course, you have like the honeymoon phase of the brand new game and it's really exciting to play it. And that's kind of what I think I'm feeling here with Elden Ring right now. But if I'm like 30, 40, 50 hours in and I'm still having that similar feeling of just finding new stuff in this world that is really exciting, then I think we have a winner here with Elden Ring. So we'll see how things go. Of course, as I beat some of the larger bosses and play through the mandatory part of the game itself, I'll see how well this thing holds up. But so far, so good with Elden Ring. I think if you're a Souls fan, you've probably already bought this game and you're already playing it. If you were considering getting in because you've been curious around the Souls series, I think this is a very approachable game in the Souls lineup, but it's still going to beat you down pretty bad. So expect frustration is what I'll say when you go in. But if, hey, you never know. Maybe the combat clicks with you and all of a sudden you're incredible at the game. But let me know your thoughts about Elden Ring down in the comments. Like I said, this was going to be planned a bit differently and things happened, but I still wanted to get some of my thoughts out there, especially after I realized that I very quickly accumulated about 5 hours into this game. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.